Hi, my name is Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I'd like to revisit Boris Johnson's Russian links, especially in light of the news last week that the government are finally ready to release the report into Russian interference that the Prime Minister was refusing to publish before the general election. But first, if you'd like to see more of my videos, then please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So let us remind ourselves what was reported back when Boris Johnson became Foreign Secretary under Theresa May a few years ago, when we were silly enough to think things were probably as bad as they were going to get. Now, ordinarily, the Foreign Secretary has oversight over MI6. This is the UK's equivalent of the CIA. But Johnson was not to be trusted with this role, and things were rejigged. He was considered a security risk, even by his close cabinet colleagues, even by the Prime Minister at the time. Well, now that man is the Prime Minister. There is nobody able to remove oversight of anything from him due to risks to the state or for any other reason. He has oversight over anything he wants for any reason he likes. And Boris Johnson has long been known to have shared too close relationships with those close to President Putin of Russia, something that came to the fore just before the general election. So with so many key players and features in common between the 2016 Brexit referendum in the UK and the US presidential election of the same year, and with the US authorities discovering Russian interference with their elections, and indeed Boris Johnson himself has appeared as a person of interest in their investigations and still is. It was inconceivable that the Russians wouldn't also have been interfering with our processes. There's so much in common. Whenever you look at anything to do with the Brexit referendum or the US presidential election, you don't have to dig very deep before you find very common people involved in very common procedures. Now, an investigation took place in the UK, rather more low-key than in the US, and a report was completed shortly before winter of this year. The report was cleared by the Cabinet Office for publication. The final formality was being signed off by the Prime Minister. I mean, it's a formality, really, as a politician can't possibly be expected to have any expertise at all in order to be able to tell whether or not a document contains any information that might pose a threat to the security of the nation should it become public. That's what officials are for, and they had cleared it as not containing any such information. But the Prime Minister is Boris Johnson, and Boris Johnson withheld publication anyway. Parliament could have ordered him to hand it over, but they, in a spectacular act of shooting yourself in the balls, decided to agree to Boris Johnson's idea to dissolve themselves and remove their powers for an ill-advised and, as it turned out, completely disastrous general election, when they should have waited until he'd released this report that they knew was coming. Now, all sorts of people who were involved in the report and know what's in it, but can't say anything until it's released, were calling for its release. Now, this, if nothing else, would leave us in no doubt at all that the report does indeed suggest Russian interference in the Brexit referendum. But Boris Johnson refused to publish it, and there was nobody now to stop him. And upon refusing to publish it, lo and behold, he gets a fairly hefty donation from a certain Russian donor. Now, Boris Johnson, after the general election, has a massive majority of toadies in Parliament who would sell their own grandmothers, much less the country, to park their arse on those what look to me very uncomfortable green benches. He feels indestructible now. How indestructible? Well, this is a man whom people know to be too close to those who are also rather close to President Putin. He was deemed a security threat as Foreign Secretary, and he has suppressed a report detailing Russian interference in our electoral processes, and after making that decision, received a hefty donation from a Russian backer. So, wouldn't it be unwise, to say the least, to get the result of the general election and then immediately go and celebrate the result at a party hosted by a former KGB agent. Wouldn't that just be raising more suspicion? But that's exactly what he did. We are not in normal political times after all. After a general election win where he has suppressed information about Russia interfering in our public polls and setting up powerful lobby groups in order to influence politicians, actually, scratch that. Buying politicians is what it's all about. If you talk to a politician, you may influence them with your words. If you pay them to do a thing and they do it, you are buying that politician. So when Boris Johnson can do all that, free from any worry about what inferences people may draw or how it may be reported, it gives you insight into just how much power he now believes himself to have. And I suspect he's not wrong. There were very few sections of the media that made anything of this at all. Now, don't get me wrong, this former agent, Alexander Lebedev, is a guy who's been friendly with Boris Johnson many times in the past. He's also a member of London's high society. The party was for his birthday, not for the general election result. And a number of other people were in attendance without drawing criticism, although I would criticise some of them. But normal political wisdom suggests that if you personally are being accused of being too close to someone that maybe you shouldn't, you certainly don't go to a lavish party at their place as an honoured guest. More so when you're a prime minister accused of selling out your country to an unfriendly foreign power linked very strongly to the host of that party. And that report has now been authorised for release. So when am I going to talk about what's in it? Oh, yeah, it's not released. It's not been released. No, that would be silly, wouldn't it? It's not been released and it's not going to be released, at least not yet and not for a little while yet. Because apparently, because reasons, we have to wait for new select committees to form. So select committees are formed of MPs in Parliament. Obviously, there were no MPs a couple of weeks ago. Then we had a general election. Now there are MPs again, many of them new MPs, which is part of the problem. And they now have to form various select committees. Only Boris Johnson is also delaying the forming of those select committees as well. So it's going to be a while because I imagine from his point of view, it's one thing for the public to have found out that the very tight referendum result that is causing us to rip up our constitution was won due to the illegal behaviour of British citizens. Oh, that's one thing. That's fine, it seems. But Johnson perhaps seems nervous at the prospect of letting the general public know that Putin also interfered, with Boris Johnson's cause at the end of the day, at least nervous about doing so this side of Brexit. So he's making sure that the document can't possibly be released until we are no longer members of the EU and nothing can be done about it. I have to say, I'm not entirely convinced anything would be done about it anyway. It will be underreported by the bulk of the media in this country, which is now in his pocket. And for the rest of us, it will be just one more reason to demonstrate our government's betrayal of their own country. But then we knew that anyway. There comes a point where you have enough reasons already. You don't need even more, even if the reasons still coming are much, much worse. And that's always assuming that the report is ever published without major redactions, at least. Because at the end of the day, let's say he did release it with major redactions, who's going to stop him? Parliament? Parliament's behind him. So we still don't even know if the report really is going to be published yet. So I hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, then please click the Patreon link for details as well. And until next time, I'll see you later.